The chair recognizes the gentleman from California.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous materials on the bill under consideration.
Without objection, so ordered. Gentleman from California.
Mr. Speaker, I yield to myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you again, Mr. Speaker. I rise today in support of H.R. 2212, which would direct the Secretary of Interior to place into trust 300 acres of Bureau of Land Management land for the Susanville Indian Rancheria. These isolated and surplus BLMs are adjacent to existing tribal lands in Lassen County, California. Since 2005, the tribe has worked with the local California BLM office to one day complete the transfer of these lands, which are culturally and historically significant to the tribe. Comprised of the descendants of 4 tribes within the region, the Mountain Maidu, Northern Paiute, the Pit River, and the Washoe, the Susanville Indian Rancheria has a long history of relocation and adversity. The Rancheria's ancestors were party to 18 unratified treaties with the federal government, and their lands were taken after passage of the Land Claims Act of 1851. Displaced during the California gold rush of the 1850s, the tribe was homeless until 1923, when the federal government purchased and placed into trust 30 acres. Since that time, another 120 acres was added by Congress in 1978, and approximately 950 acres have been added by BIA action. The Rancheria has long ties to this land, which holds a number of cultural, historical, and archaeological sites, including grinding stones, petroglyphs, and other important artifacts. Rancheria members also gather traditional herbs, medicines, and vegetables on the land and continue to hunt game in the area as their ancestors did. The land has been classified as surplus by the BLM, which has written in support of transferring the parcel to the Rancheria, and it is adjacent, again, to the Rancheria's existing lands. The Rancheria intends to continue using the land for traditional purposes, as well as eventually constructing a cultural center, a museum, and recreational facilities, including sports fields. At the request of the tribe, the bill includes a prohibition on gaming. The Rancheria has long proven to be a conscientious and thoughtful neighbor to the city of Susanville, and I have no doubt that it will prove to be a good steward of this land. Mr. Speaker, this bill was passed by the Natural Resources Committee with unanimous support. The Senate counterpart, sponsored by Senator Boxer, who we found agreement on this legislation on, also received unanimous support in the Senate Indian Affairs Committee. I urge your support and thank you for your consideration of this measure. And I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Arizona is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
So ordered.
H.R. 2212, introduced by our colleague, Mr. LaMalfa, is indeed a good piece of legislation. 300 acres of BLM land to be put into trust for the benefit of the Susanville Indian Rancheria. The land in question is not only adjacent to Susanville's current trust land, it is also part of their Aboriginal territories. There are numerous cultural and archaeological sites on the land that the Susanville members seek to protect, including the remains of a historic Native American village. In addition, the area is important as a traditional hunting ground and utilized for traditional ceremonies. The land has been identified by BLM as excess inventory and a cost burden to the federal government. Mr. Speaker, this bill is a win-win for all parties involved. The Susanville Rancheria members will finally have a portion of its historic land returned, and the federal government will save money on administrative costs on land that it does not want. I want to congratulate the sponsor of the legislation, and I urge a swift passage, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from California is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, again, I appreciate the support of our committee's ranking member, Mr. Grijalva, and the unanimous effort to move this bill out of committee. So thank you, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves.
Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman from Arizona.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back the remainder of our time.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from California.
Again, I appreciate it and would seek support for my legislation, and I will yield back the balance of my time, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman yields back. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 2212 as amended? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, two-thirds being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended, the bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid upon the table. For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move to suspend the rules and pass H.R. 2270 as amended.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
Union Calendar Number 256, H.R. 2270, a bill to redesignate the Nisqually National Wildlife Refuge located in the state of Washington as the Billy Frank Jr. Nisqually National Wildlife Refuge to establish the Medicine Creek Treaty National Historic Site within the Wildlife Refuge and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from California, Mr. LaMalfa, and the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Grijalva, each will control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from California.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous materials on the bill under consideration.
Without objection, so ordered. Gentleman from California.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
So ordered.
Thank you. H.R. 2270, introduced by my friend Congressman Denny Heck from Washington and co-sponsored by the entire Washington delegation, would redesignate the Nisqually National Wildlife Refuge, located in the state of Washington, as the Billy Frank Jr. Nisqually National Wildlife Refuge, and establish within the refuge the Medicine Creek Treaty National Memorial. This bill is intended to honor the life and legacy of Billy Frank Jr., who dedicated his life to bringing together tribes, government officials, and others to improve treaty rights, tribal sovereignty, environmental stewardship, and salmon recovery in the Puget Sound area. Frank Jr., who passed away in 2014, was awarded the Albert Schweitzer Prize for Humanitarianism and the Martin Luther King Jr. Distinguished Service Award, and was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize in 2010. The bill also establishes a national memorial within the refuge to commemorate the signing of the 1854 Medicine Creek Treaty, which established reservation land and the right to fish for Puget Sound area tribes. Congressman Heck has worked tirelessly to honor the treaty and the life and the work of Billy Frank Jr. I strongly encourage my colleagues to vote yes on H.R. 2270, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from California reserves. The gentleman from Arizona.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. H.R. 2270 designates National Wildlife Refuge and the Nisqually River Delta as the Billy Frank Jr. Nisqually National Wildlife Refuge. Renaming this refuge will honor Billy Frank Jr.'s legacy on the river where he spent his life. Billy Frank Jr., who passed away last year, has been recognized for his work defending treaty rights, tribal sovereignty, and salmon recovery efforts in his home state of Washington. Aside from the awards that were noted by my colleague that he has received, November 24th, President Obama presented his family with the Medal of Freedom honor that he so justly deserved. The bill also creates a national memorial to commemorate the signing of the Medicine Creek Treaty in 1854. I want to congratulate and thank my colleague from Washington, Representative Heck, for his tireless work and advocacy on behalf of this legislation, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Arizona reserves. Gentleman from California is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Again, I commend my friend, Mr. Heck, for his quality legislation, and I will reserve the rest of my time. Gentleman
from California reserves. Gentleman from Arizona.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield as much time as he may consume to the gentleman from Washington, sponsor of the legislation, Representative Heck.
Gentleman from Washington is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just last week, we were home celebrating Thanksgiving, and we were giving thanks for everything we were blessed with, everything we cherished, and frankly, probably a lot of the things we take for granted. For those of us in the Pacific Northwest, we give thanks for the Puget Sound, we give thanks for our salmon, we give thanks for all the natural beauty that surrounds us, and we give thanks that Billy Frank Jr. was in our lives. As was indicated earlier, in addition to the many other awards he received in his lifetime, just last week, the President conferred upon Billy Frank Jr. posthumously the Presidential Medal of Freedom. It is literally no exaggeration to suggest that what Martin Luther King meant to civil rights and Nelson Mandela meant to South Africa, Billy Frank Jr. meant to the entire Pacific Northwest, indeed to indigenous people throughout the globe. He is a fitting person for the prestigious honor that we hope to bestow upon him today, but we have an opportunity to do that, and I recommend we seize it. His legacy and the place he called home. Billy Frank Jr. was indeed the foremost advocate for restoration of Native American fishing treaty rights in the Pacific Northwest. He cherished clean water, healthy salmon runs, and he was a key voice in the recovery of the Puget Sound. He also, as has not been mentioned, proudly served our nation in the United States Marine Corps. He was an MP, I believe, during the Korean War. He got along with everyone. He was open and inclusive. His energy was literally infectious. We were deeply stunned in May of 2014 that he passed away. Even though at the age of 83, we thought Billy would live forever. He is gone, but his spirit is not. His story is not. His courage and belief in us is here. Because you see, Billy wandered the halls of Congress frequently, testified numerous times. He respected this institution, and he was a powerful voice within our chambers. And his story is in the Nisqually National Wildlife Refuge in the 10th Congressional District, which I have the privilege to represent, which we now protect to give our wildlife a clean and sustainable home. Billy grew up at a place called Frank's Landing, which is literally just a hop, skip, and a jump from the refuge. He fished in the Nisqually River, in and next to the area where the refuge is now. That is the location where he was arrested more than 50 times for advocating for his treaty fishing rights. This bill will rename that refuge after Billy Frank Jr., and also, as has been indicated, calls upon the establishment of a national memorial at the exact place which was the signing of the Medicine Creek Treaty in 1854. That was the first treaty in the state of Washington between Indian people and the newly established territorial government. In this case, it was between the people of the Nisqually, the Puyallup, Squaxin Island, and the Muckleshoots. Throughout his storied career, people often ask Billy, how is it that you do this? Get up every day and so effectively advocate on behalf of clean water, good fish runs. How do you do that, decade after decade? And he would always tell them the same thing. Tell your story. So when people go to the Billy Frank Jr. Nisqually National Wildlife Refuge, they'll be able to see why he held fish-ins. They'll see why he risked arrests. They'll see why he ultimately worked with others to help protect his home. Like many young people today, he fought for what he believed in, but later worked with lawmakers to build consensus. He started out as a civil rights protester, civilly disobedient, and an advocate, and he ended up being one of the great uniters in the history of the nation, and certainly the Pacific Northwest. So I hope that when people drive by the sign that directs them to the refuge, maybe they'll feel a little of that Billy magic too. Maybe they'll wonder, well, who was this Billy Frank Jr.? What did he do? For those of us who knew him, it will be a frequent reminder of this hero. They say you die twice. The first time, and the second time when they stop speaking about you. It is our goal that they never stop speaking about Billy Frank Jr. and the lessons he taught us all. The refuge will be a constant reminder. I knew Billy for almost 40 years. I loved him like a beloved uncle. In fact, I called him Uncle Billy, but you know what? I was absolutely not special in that regard. Hundreds, if not thousands, of people did the same thing. Indeed, at his memorial service, the official estimate of the number in attendance was 10,000. That's how beloved this man was. I'd like to thank the members of the House Natural Resources Committee who unanimously approved this bill, all the members of the House delegation from Washington State. I would also like to especially recognize Chairman Bishop and the ranking member, Grijalva, and the hardworking committee staff, both for the majority and the minority, for their help on this legislation. In conclusion, Billy once famously said, I don't believe in magic. I believe in the sun and the star, the water, the tides, the floods, the owls, the hawks flying, the river running, the wind talking. They're measurements, he said. They tell us how healthy things are, how healthy we are, because we and they are the same. Let's remind visitors that we and they are the same at the Billy Frank Jr. Nisqually Wildlife Refuge. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And with that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Washington yields back. Gentleman from Arizona is recognized. Gentleman from Arizona reserves. Gentleman from California.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And again, Mr. Heck, to be commended for bringing forward such a worthy piece of legislation to honor a man who has done so much in your area there. And indeed, this legislation will make sure that his story continues to be told and that he will always be commemorated, memorialized in that region because of that. So congratulations to you on this, and I'm proud to support the bill. Mr. Speaker, I reserve.
Gentleman from California reserves. Gentleman from Arizona.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield as much time as you may consume to the gentleman from Washington, Representative Kilmer.
The gentleman from Washington is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I join my colleagues in standing up today for the legacy of a true American hero, Billy Frank Jr. For Billy, protecting our natural world and everything that depends on it wasn't a political issue. Rather, it was an innate calling. And folks responded to that. They followed his fearless protest by standing up for civil rights. They followed his example by becoming fishermen themselves in places like South Puget Sound. They followed his lead in championing clean water and fish runs and protecting Puget Sound. They listened to his ideas about keeping communities vibrant by building tribal youth centers. And in the marble halls of Congress, he convinced so many that tribal treaty rights could not be held back and that we can't keep damaging our environment and that we've got to stand up for extraordinary bodies of water like Puget Sound. He left tracks all across our state and our nation, and his advocacy will live on. To help honor this legacy, I encourage my colleagues to vote for this bill sponsored by Congressman Heck that I was proud to co-sponsor, renaming the Nisqually National Wildlife Refuge the Billy Frank Jr. National Wildlife Refuge. It's the right thing to do to honor all the work that Billy did for all of us and to serve as a reminder that we need to keep fighting for all of those things that he fought for. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back.
Gentleman from Washington yields back. The gentleman from Arizona.
Thank you. And before I yield back the remainder of our time, let me thank the chair of the Public Land Subcommittee, Mr. McClintock, the ranking member, Ms. Sangas, for their work and the staff's work on this. And again, to Mr. Heck and the delegation from Washington, a great piece of legislation, and I urge its passage, and I yield back the remainder of our time.
Gentleman from Arizona yields back. The gentleman from California.
Mr. Speaker, I have no further speakers on my side, so I will yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from California yields back. The question is, will the